This is not legend. This is not folklore. Everything you're about to hear actually happened. A king ordered the execution of his own wife, right inside his palace walls. 3 sons followed, one barely out of boyhood. Not because they betrayed him, but because he thought they might. Herod the Great. His name once shook the foundations of Judea. No one, not even his family, stood between him and power, and he would do anything to keep his throne, even if it meant spilling the blood of those closest to him. This is a true story, recorded in Roman chronicles and Jewish tradition alike, a story many tried to bury, but history remembers. So let me ask you, how far can a ruler go before he stops being human? Watch closely, and drop a comment below. Was Herod a monster, or just a man consumed by fear? Don't look away just yet, because this isn't just a tale of betrayal. It's a descent into madness, power, and murder inside a golden palace stained with crimson. Herod wasn't just cruel. He was calculating, charismatic, feared by Rome, and feared even more by his own children. And it all began with a royal wedding. The world Herod was born into was not a peaceful one. It was a fractured land, one ruled by the sword, watched by foreign eyes, and torn between gods, cultures, and kings. The region was Judea, a kingdom once proud and sovereign, now squeezed beneath the iron hand of Rome. The year was around 73 BCE. The Roman Republic had already begun expanding eastward, consuming everything in its path. Jerusalem's great temples still stood, but its throne was no longer its own. Real power belonged not to priests or prophets, but to Roman generals and their puppet kings. It was in this chaos that Herod was born. He wasn't pure-blooded royalty, not even close. His father Antipater, the Idumean, was an ambitious advisor. A cunning political operator from a neighboring people, Rome, had forcibly converted to Judaism. His mother was Nabatean, an Arab princess. To some of the Jewish elite, Herod was already a stained half-outsider, half-usurper, and entirely unwelcome. But Antipater knew how to survive. When Julius Caesar marched through the region, Antipater aligned himself with Rome. He became Judea's de facto ruler under Roman supervision and ensured that his son would have a place in the new order. From the very start, Herod was groomed for power. At just 25, he was appointed governor of Galilee, a region plagued by rebels and zealots. And there, he showed the world exactly what kind of ruler he was willing to become. One of his first acts was to hunt down a rebel leader, Hezekiah, and execute him without trial. The move horrified the Jewish Sanhedrin, the religious court, but Rome approved. That single decision made Herod's path clear. He would serve Rome's interests first. Law, tradition, and bloodlines were secondary, and Rome would reward him well. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, the political world splintered again. Civil war broke out across the Empire. Octavian, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, Brutus Cassius, and amid that chaos, Herod made his most dangerous and brilliant move yet. He chose a side, and it was the right one. With support from Mark Antony, Herod was declared king of the Jews by the Roman Senate in 40 BCE. But Judea didn't bow so easily. The people resisted. Jerusalem held out. For 3 brutal years, Herod fought to claim a throne he'd already been given on paper. It was only in 37 BCE, after a long siege and rivers of blood, that Herod finally entered Jerusalem. Not as a general, but as king. The crown was his, but peace never. Even as he walked through the gates of his new capital, Herod knew his rule rested on a knife's edge. The Jewish elite hated him both for his foreign ancestry and his Roman allegiance. The Hasmonean royal family who had ruled before him still held deep support among the people. And inside his own house, rival bloodlines and whispered claims to the throne festered like rot beneath marble. So Herod built not just cities, ports, and fortresses, but loyalty. He constructed the massive port of Caesarea, rebuilt the Second Temple, into a wonder of the ancient world, and covered the land with monuments to Roman grandeur. He called himself the protector of Jewish faith, even as he taxed heavily and installed spies into the priesthood. And then he married Mariamne. She was beautiful, noble, and Hasmonean, the bloodline of the old kings. It was the perfect political union. Her marriage would silence critics, bridge dynasties, legitimize Herod's reign. But from the moment they stood at the altar, the seeds of destruction were already planted. Because while Herod saw strategy, Mariamne saw something else. Entirely, a man whose throne was built on foreign swords and family blood. And that blood would soon come calling. The marriage of Herod and Mariamne should have marked the beginning of unity. It was on the surface a brilliant move. She brought with her the prestige of the Hasmonean dynasty, a line of rulers deeply respected by the Jewish people. Herod, ever calculating, believed this union would stabilize his rule and silence critics who called him a foreigner, a Roman pawn. But love was never part of the plan. At least, not for Mariamne. She despised him. Not just for the blood already on his hands, but for what he represented: betrayal of her people, subjugation to Rome, and the slow erosion of everything the Hasmoneans had built. Still, she played the part. She smiled in public. She bore him children. But in private she remained distant, cold, regal in her silence. And Herod, the king who had crushed rebellions and outwitted Roman politics, found himself unable to conquer the heart of a woman he believed he owned. That rejection was a wound he never recovered from. It festered into obsession. Herod became haunted by the thought that Mariamne didn't love him, that perhaps she never had. And worse, that she might be conspiring against him. Her family certainly had motive. Her mother Alexandra had always resented Herod's rise. She believed her daughter had been used as a pawn. And she was right. In secret, Alexandra made overtures to Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt and lover of Mark Antony. Cleopatra, who had ambitions of her own, supported the idea that Alexandra's son Aristobulus should be appointed high priest and one day perhaps challenge Herod's throne. Herod was furious, not because of the politics, but because Mariamne's family was maneuvering behind his back. He relented and made Aristobulus high priest, a decision forced by political pressure. But then, months later, Aristobulus was dead, drowned during a public bath at Herod's palace in Jericho. Witnesses said it was an accident. No one believed it. The people mourned. The Hasmoneans raged, and Mariamne stared at Herod with eyes that no longer pretended. He had killed her brother, and something inside her shattered. From that moment, the marriage became a silent war. Mariamne no longer hid her contempt. Herod, in turn, became more possessive, watching her, controlling her movements, listening through walls. But the more he tried to hold on to her, the faster she slipped away. He began to spiral. Court informants whispered about letters being intercepted, servants being tortured. Herod's temper became legendary. A flicker of perceived disloyalty could end a man's life. He banished advisors, executed officials, and turned the palace into a prison gilded in gold. And through it all, Mariamne endured. Not with fear, but pride. She refused to be broken. That defiance, her refusal to kneel, drove Herod mad. He couldn't kill her. Not yet. To do so would provoke revolt. But he also couldn't trust her. And that, to Herod, was the same as betrayal. So he devised a backup plan. He summoned his most loyal servant, Joseph, and gave him an unthinkable order. If anything happens to me, if I die, you must kill Mariamne. He wanted to ensure she'd never be with another man even after his death. But the plan backfired. While Herod was away in Rome, Mariamne grew suspicious of Joseph, pressed him, cornered him, and eventually Joseph told her the truth, that Herod had left orders for her death. When Herod returned, the confrontation was immediate. Mariamne demanded answers, accused him of seeing her as property, of ruling with cruelty, of loving only himself. Her words cut like knives. And for once Herod had no defense. He felt exposed, weak, betrayed. And then he learned Joseph had told her. Fury replaced doubt. Jealousy replaced sorrow. He had Joseph executed instantly. And Mariamne, he didn't kill her. Not yet. Instead, he watched her, isolated her, fed his paranoia until it devoured him whole. His mother and sister Salome and Cyprus saw the opportunity. They hated Mariamne, feared her influence. And so they whispered in Herod's ear, "She's plotting against you." Whether it was true no longer mattered. Herod believed it. In a palace ruled by suspicion, that was all it took. Mariamne was arrested, accused of treason, of plotting poison, of trying to seduce Herod's officials to overthrow him. The trial was a farce, the witnesses coached, the outcome predetermined. Still, Mariamne never begged. When she stood before the court, her face was serene. When the sentence was read, she didn't scream. And when Herod hesitated, truly hesitated at the brink of her execution, she looked at him not with fear, but disgust. That broke him more than any rebellion ever could. He gave the order. She was led away. Herod returned to his palace, alone. And for the first time in his reign, he wept. The sentence was death. It had always been death. The trial was just a ritual, a thin veil of justice draped over vengeance. Herod didn't need evidence. He needed silence. And Mariamne, with her bloodline, her beauty, her defiance, had become too dangerous to live. The day of her execution arrived under a gray, breathless sky. Jerusalem had heard whispers, of course. The queen had been arrested, then vanished. Some said she was in prison, others that she had fled. But the truth was far more brutal. She had been kept in near isolation. Her food tasted first by servants. Her guards rotated daily. No mirrors, no light, no letters. Just stone walls and the sound of footsteps coming and going. Herod didn't visit her. Couldn't. Not out of cruelty, but out of torment. He wandered his palace like a ghost, tearing at his robes, unable to sleep. Those who passed him in the halls said he looked hollow, unshaved, talking to himself. He called for her, then cursed her name, then wept at her absence. His obsession had become a sickness, and still, he gave the order. The guards took Mariamne from her cell at dawn. She did not scream. She did not plead. She walked with grace, her back straight, her hands bound in rope that left marks on her skin. Her dress, once royal blue, was now worn and stained. But her eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, remained defiant. The place of execution was private, not a public square, but a walled courtyard inside the fortress. Herod had insisted. He didn't want riots. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted it done. The executioner was a veteran soldier, emotionless, precise. He stepped forward. But for a moment, just a breath, he hesitated. He had seen battle war revolt, but never had he been asked to kill a queen, and never had he faced a gaze like Mariamne's. She said nothing. No final words, no curse. Just silence and contempt. A silence so loud that even the guards looked away. The blade fell, not once, but twice. The first swing missed its mark, striking the base of her neck, drawing blood, but not death. She gasped the first sound she had made all morning. Her knees buckled, her lips parted. But she didn't cry out. The second blow was clean, final. And the courtyard fell still. No cheering, no chants. Just the sound of blood dripping onto stone. When word reached Herod, he locked himself in his chambers. For 3 days, no one saw him. He refused food, refused sleep. He screamed her name into the walls. He tore at paintings, smashed amphorae, and collapsed in fits of anguish. He had killed the one person he had ever truly wanted, and she had died hating him. He begged servants to bring her back. ordered his physicians to explain why he couldn't feel his limbs, called for her clothes, her scent, her voice, anything to convince himself she wasn't gone. He slept with her robe beside him, and every night after that, he dreamed of her, standing over him, not weeping, just watching. The palace changed after her death. The halls grew darker, colder. Herod's paranoia intensified. He no longer trusted anyone. Not his court, not his guards, not his sons, especially not his sons. Two of Mariamne's children, Alexander and Aristobulus, had grown into men proud, handsome, and dangerously popular. The people saw in them the Hasmonean blood they had lost, and Herod saw only rebellion. The ghosts returned. The whispers began again, and the blade once drawn for Mariamne would soon find others. In a matter of years, Herod would accuse his sons of treason, have them arrested, tortured, and finally executed by strangulation. He had wiped out his own line not to protect the kingdom, but to protect himself from shadows only he could see. The man who had once built cities and temples now sat alone, surrounded by spies, locked behind fortress walls. His final years were a horror. His body decayed from within, a disease that rotted his flesh oozed from his skin and stank so terribly that even his doctors recoiled. His mind followed. He screamed at empty rooms, ordered mass executions of dissenters. He even commanded the arrest of prominent Jewish elders with plans to have them slaughtered at the hour of his death, so that at least someone in Judea would mourn when he died. They were spared. He wasn't. Herod died unloved, unmourned. His legacy soaked in blood and suspicion, but Mariamne, she became something more than queen, something beyond history. To some, she was a martyr, a woman who stood with dignity in the face of tyranny. To others, a tragic symbol of how power devours love, loyalty, and even reason. Her body was buried, her voice silenced, but her memory that never left him. Even in his last breath, they say he called her name, not as king, not as judge, but as a man, finally broken. Time has a way of softening kings. Even the cruelest are often remembered for their monuments, their victories, their legacies carved in stone. But Herod, his name never escaped the blood. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Rome became legend. Jerusalem changed hands. But Herod's name remained not in glory but in caution. Not as the great builder he so desperately wanted to be remembered as, but as a symbol of what power becomes when consumed by fear. Yes, he built marvels. The port of Caesarea, the fortress of Masada, the reconstruction of the Second Temple, which stood as the pride of Judea. His architecture rivaled that of emperors. His cities flourished with Roman approval. But behind every wall he built lay a grave. Mariamne's grave was unmarked. No statue, no temple, no elegy. Her story lived on, only in whispers in family lineages, in quiet retellings in Jewish and Roman texts that painted her as a tragic figure, regal, proud, and ultimately destroyed by the man who claimed to love her. And what of Herod's dynasty? It collapsed not long after him. None of his sons ruled as he did. The kingdom was divided, and over time absorbed into the Roman Empire directly. His bloodline, once so ruthlessly protected, faded into irrelevance. Forgotten names buried beneath centuries of history. But the legend remained, a cautionary tale. In Christian tradition, Herod the Great is the tyrant who ordered the massacre of the innocents, the slaughter of every male child in Bethlehem. Though historians debate the event's details, the association endured. He became the face of paranoia, of royal cruelty, of unchecked authority taken to the darkest extremes. And Mariamne. She became something rarer, a quiet symbol of resistance. She never raised an army, never plotted revolution, but she endured. With dignity, with silence, with eyes that looked power in the face and refused to look away. Her legacy was not written in stone, but in memory, in the way she haunted Herod even after death, in the way her story outlasted his monuments. And perhaps in that there is a lesson more lasting than any empire. History doesn't always reward power. It remembers those who were broken by it, and those who stood unbroken until the end. Even today, scholars return to Herod's story, not with admiration, but with unease. Archaeologists dig through his palaces with awe and discomfort. Psychologists study his reign as a case of absolute power, twisted by personal obsession. His name is invoked when history repeats itself, when rulers silence dissent, when paranoia turns deadly, when love is sacrificed for control. Because Herod the Great wasn't just a tyrant. He was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when the fear of losing power becomes greater than love, faith, or reason. And Mariamne, she reminds us what it means to face that mirror and not flinch. Herod died surrounded by stone and silence. No son beside him, no wife to mourn him. Only the echoes of the choices he made and the woman he could never forget. History did not erase him, but it didn't forgive him either. His story is a warning that even kings crowned by empires can fall to the weight of their own fear, and that sometimes the most enduring legacy is the silence of the one they tried to destroy. If you found this story haunting, you're not alone. But the ancient world held more shadows than just Herod's. What happened when power met seduction in Cleopatra's court, or when Rome crowned a boy emperor named Nero and watched the empire burn click? Here to uncover another true story of betrayal, obsession, and ruin. And let us know in the comments, was Herod a madman or just a man lost to fear? Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more forgotten truths that history tried to bury. The past isn't dead. It's waiting to be heard.